All right, let's talk about mind maps. Mind maps. I was introduced to these many years ago, and wound up planning out quite a bit of software with them, actually. Just making these relations and connections and adding notes and having all kinds of fun with that. I'm not gonna lie, I might be able to find that old software. That'd be interesting. I don't think we had a copy. We might have had a demo version. I forget, but this is like 25-year-old software. It's probably available. I don't know. Anyways, I was writing out, I was sitting on OneNote, which I'm going to have to get myself out of. Yeah. I was sitting in OneNote, writing out stuff, trying to plan out a website, and just like the data, where the tests need to be, what elements need to be tested, and I wanted things to be in a more consistent manner, in a more repeatable, reference-able manner than having a OneNote with my squiggles and arrows pointing all over the place to circles. And it reminded me of the Mindmap software, which allows you to make these hierarchical lists that have notes on them, and little thought bubbles that come out of them, and then arrows that link the sections together so that you know that there's a connection between here and there, and so that when you look at something, you know that this item is referenced at these other places. And this idea of these linked things, and the the Obsidian has these linked nodes, and then that graph. I just kind of thought there might be something there. Maybe I haven't explored it completely, but I just want to be able to add notes to things and be able to look at, say, one individual element of a database, one database entry, and say, where is this database entry used? What are the restrictions on this database element? And is it being appropriately used? What are the tests that I can use? What pages need to be tested for this database element? And what, you can build protections into the SQL properties of that database element so that you don't have to apply them to the front end. So I'm just trying to figure out where I can target an individual element and say, where is this element connected, and just basically know everything about this node on this graph of items. And I found a few items that were pretty similar, but I wound up on a old Java tool that was pretty close to the original mind map style layout. All that really needs to be able to happen is you need to be able to drag and drop nodes of the mind map, set them up hierarchically, and then be able to well, obviously the first thing might be to be able to export it to a variety of formats, and to be able to pull it up however you want, and to be able to download the software and be able to run it wherever you want, however you want, whenever you want, whyever you want, all of that. So that is definitely, that's correct, that's necessary, and that was already applied, especially for Java. So the Java is always a little janky. Doesn't really matter, because there's some good hotkeys, and I'm basically just I'm just using arrow keys to navigate. It's a straight hierarchy. It's a straight hierarchy, so it's very easy to navigate with arrow keys, and I can very easily hit enter to add a new sibling node, and then hit tab to add a new child node. So very easy to be looking at my squiggles on the right hand screen, and then look at the left screen and go, okay, this page needs to have these elements, and these elements will necessarily reference these database items, and that database item, that means that database item needs to have this restriction on it, needs to have this limitation on it, needs to have this requirement or property applied to it in the database. And that also means that I need to reflect that in the JavaScript input verification to make sure that it doesn't crash out because it sent it bad data. It wouldn't make it into the database, obviously, but the point is to catch it beforehand. And then that, necessarily feeds into the concept of having tests set up for it, and, answers the question of what tests need to be set up for this, and, what data elements need to be tested and how do they need to be tested. And then for any other user input action, you can build more tests for that, set up limitations for that. This field can't be longer than this, that can't be longer than that. Make sure that there's a test here. What happens, run a test that tests for an empty field, a bad, something that, with an emoji in it or something, crazy stuff like that. And you can run a test like that and see what it does, and make sure that you have logic that catches all of those instances of issues. Further, you can, as you're adding these things, some of this stuff builds into a session tracker system that you can use for building out what a session needs to track, and what data points are useful and what data points are basically unnecessary in tracking for the session. So having a one-stop shop basically for everything, because right now a lot of stuff winds up getting spread out, and then I wind up looking through, a customer pings me about a project I haven't worked on in a while, and it's like, okay, what on earth, what did I do here? What is going on? What happens? Like, you got to make a change here. Okay, what are the requirements for that? Now I'm like going to that page, looking for that element, finding where that entry goes in, figuring out what elements or what catches I put around that element, looking at the database, trying to find other places where that data is referenced in the page to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Then once I fully understand what that data element is, now I can say, okay, yes, we can definitely make that change, or no, here's why we can't make that change, but here's an alternative, and make sure that that alternative doesn't break something else through the testing process. So thinking about the metrics from the beginning, and I've been introduced to this idea recently. I've been trying unsuccessfully to build tests, to run test-driven development. I'm not sure that test-driven development is the right way to go. A lot of people talk about, well, you just start with the test and make the test fail, and now you start building around that test so that it succeeds, and then add that on. Okay, but are you adding literally every feature and testing literally every element? How many tests is that? Is that like every single test you could possibly imagine? Multiple, 2 to 3, well, 3 or more, 3 to 10 maybe tests for input or bad data or something for every single data point? Every single data point? It sounds like your job is just making tests then, which, if that's your job, sure, but my job is architecture, not making tests. So yeah, the main points, the big points, especially user input, any other weird points of failure, timing, stuff like that, that's test worthy, absolutely. Measuring user experience and tracking the session, what the user is doing, what the user is experiencing, and what they were inputting when that experience occurred, all very valid, and I am understanding that it is entirely necessary. If you want to talk about test-driven development, what really makes more sense is metric-driven development, being able to write the requirements, and then immediately after writing the requirements, start writing the metrics. What is valid data that helps me to understand what is going on with this product, and what changes, basically what can go wrong and what can go right, and then what do I need to know in order to determine if things have gone wrong or right, so that when you start design, when you start architecture, when you start actually writing code, you have a mind to, I need to figure out where I can store this data point, how I can store this data point, so that I can know what's happening later on when I come back to this. Or, if I need to come back to this. there were some, well, at Lexmark they called it, Lexmark's an IBM heritage company, so there was a team I worked on, and they called them the Cowboys because they would just make changes instead of involving instead of notifying the Pope and like billowing white smoke out of the chimney in order to light the fires, the beacon of Gondor, so that everyone would come to their aid and have a meeting about a meeting for a meeting to plan the meeting about the point that they want to make, the change they want to make. So they called them Cowboys. And at this point in my career, I can say, yeah, they were Cowboys. But there was really just one guy running it. Usually one, maybe two guys that could work together on something and be like, okay, I saw that change that you made. They had version control, what more can you ask for? So yeah, a little bit of Cowboy stuff, all right? But I don't think they were really outfitted to measure metrics and stuff like that. But you can have a local printer that you run. I made my update, I pushed it to the customer. Now I'm going to run input through my local device. I'm going to load that code onto my local device. I don't know how much I can talk about. Emulate, basically, test the thing yourself and set up, I guess, input, false inputs in order to simulate this testing process, and make a little output thing that says, checkbox, did this thing pass? Did this thing, this was supposed to pass, did it pass? Yes. This was supposed to fail, did it fail? Yes. Just go through the list. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do that, and especially checking things like the time that it takes to do some of those things, because some of that stuff was rather slow. And if you accidentally double the time that one of the processes takes, and that process is I forget the O notation, but happens a lot, repeats a lot, well, now you've just doubled the time based on however many elements it's working on in the input. The details are not important. I shouldn't be self-censoring here, but the idea really does need to be the metrics. The metrics are the most important thing. The metrics are the metrics are the test. You could make that argument. And then once those metrics are in place and in play, you have a yardstick to measure, and that's where the engineering takes place. Because without a yardstick, without a measurement, without a tool, Uncle Bob was talking about. Hello? Uncle Bob was talking about a button that if you push the button, it tells you, does the website do what it's supposed to do? And if you could push that button, then your life gets 1,000 times easier. You push an update, you go, okay, I just tweaked a thing, or worse, I just tweaked 2 things. Good heavens. And now I push the button, and does the site work? Yes, the site works. All right, beautiful. The pit in my stomach is gone. I don't have to drag a laptop with me to dinner tonight, just in case. No worries. Now, if something breaks that you didn't catch, well, hey presto, you got to update your button, make sure that it catches that specific thing. You have a new test. Congratulations. And you just keep expanding on those tests, so you always have that big button. Now, similarly, that big button should be testing metrics, should be testing non-Boolean values for the website. And you can expand that pretty significantly. Just getting lots of data points, or I shouldn't say lots, primary data points and troubleshooting data points. Those are necessary for you to be able to say, not only did this change do the thing that I wanted it to do, which you would hopefully determine while you're making the change. You would test it after you're done applying it. Not only did the change that I made do the thing I wanted to do. It didn't break the other functions of the website, and it didn't significantly impact other processing time of the website. Or, you know, this is the yardstick. What if it made a section of the site 5 times faster? I'd want to know about that. Why on earth did that change make this section of the website 5 times faster? I might be leaving some performance on the table. Now, without that yardstick, without a non-Boolean value, without a specific, you know, a measurable value, a gradient, I should say, for that value, you would not know that. You would say, you know, did I submit a smiley emoji in my license plate and have it fail? Yes, it failed. Okay. When I submit that smiley emoji, did it fail and take 20 times longer to fail? That's kind of weird. I should look into that. Why is that happening? Is there some library that I'm using that is struggling through this emoji processing? Is that failing out? Is that stalling for some reason? That's weird. You know, you want to know about the health of the website. You want to know more intimately how the code is processing the data. And you don't get that when you only have metrics, or when you only have Boolean, you know, pass fails. So the idea of starting with requirements and then going immediately to metrics. And, you know, maybe metrics and tests are interchangeable. Maybe they're synonymous. But as long as you are testing something and not having a simple, you know, on, off, true, false, did it pass, yes, no. Getting some more performance data so that you become more intimate with the code, you become more aware of the code. And when the code is trying to tell you something, that you hear it, you find out about it. And then once you start building these tests in, you can start having it such that when an individual user begins a session, and that session terminates with a weird thing, it still passed, but it was weird. Now, maybe you hear about it. Maybe you know about it. Maybe that's logged as an event. But all of this starts with you knowing what those metrics are. You starting from the metrics. Or rather, you know, the second order. The first order is what are the requirements, and the second order is what are the metrics to fulfilling those requirements, and then building from there.